The inaugural Africa Climate Summit, and that's why it's very timely to have this particular conversation. And in studio, I'm joined by Kagweria Kome. She's a manager for Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you so much, Fatia. It's such a pleasure to be here to speak about something that I'm very passionate about, which is school meals and the linkages with climate.
You know, the thing is, when you mention or when you hear climate smart school meals, it sounds very interesting, but I don't think a lot of people understand what it means. Tell us about it.
Of course, I'm happy to. So currently we live in a very divided world and very polarized. But if you look across religious, political lines, the one thing that we all agree on is that we can increase access to school meals. For this, because we know the benefits that it has on food and nutrition security, especially in a country like ours in Kenya, whereby almost 60% of the primary school kids are not getting the nutrition that they need. Also in our continent, we have the youngest population. So our human capital is our greatest asset. So if you don't capture them in the early years with the nutrition that you need, then you're not able to allow them to live to their full potential. The other advantage of school meals that we all agree on is increased enrollment. There's evidence that it goes up by 20–25%. And even when you speak to head teachers, they'll tell you kids see the smoke in the kitchen and they run to school because they want that meal. And we do know that in our setting, for some children, that is the only regular and consistent meal that they get. Finally, there's also the benefit to the local community or the local economy. So for example, the county of Murang'a has a universal porridge program. And with this program, they've been able to create 1,000 jobs for cooks and riders and other people in the ecosystem. But then there's also the potential for farmers to feed into this system.
Right. Before we get into the advantages and the benefits, we just want to really understand what it is about, you know. When you talk about climate smart school meals, what does it entail? Is it about nutritious meals, or what is it about?
Sure, let me expound further. So globally, we have reached about 418 million kids on school meals. That's 30 million more than last year. And Kenya has not been left behind. Kenya has actually made a commitment for universal school feeding. Right now, we feed 2.3 million kids. The government has committed to 4.5 by the end of this year and 10 million by the end of 2027. And that's great. But as we work towards feeding all our kids, there's this other opportunity that lies. So for example, to cook the meals, we actually cut 1 million trees so that our kids can have a meal. In addition to that, 80% of, say, for example, the rice that we eat is actually imported rice. And also the school meals that we provide are not really representative of the diverse meals that we have in our local communities. So the government of Kenya is leveraging on this platform of the Climatesmart, on the climate summit that's going to be happening, saying we are committing to feeding our kids, but we're taking it a step further. We're going to ensure that we transition to 100% clean cooking so that we're not just feeding our kids, we're protecting our environment. In addition to that, we want to change the menus so that they're more diverse and they're representative of what we eat and what we grow. So crops that are drought resistant, so for example, you have sorghum, millet, cowpeas, green grams, very healthy meals, very healthy foods. Those are going to be included in their menus. And then in addition to that is also like, instead of creating this reliance on importing of food, sourcing from our local farmers so they're able to engage in this economy, but then you're also ensuring that it's a local ecosystem and we're able to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases by the food that we import. So that's what climate smart school meals is.
Very, very interesting and innovative actually. But like, how are locals receiving it? Like, tell you, if you try to explain to them about this smart program, how they're receiving it, are they taking it in a positive way? Are they trying to, you know, implement it themselves?
So thank you, Fatia. So I think from our experience, the best way to communicate with the people that both consume the meals or the parents who are engaging with these meals is through show and tell. So for example, the county of Murang'a that has the universal program, they do drink an uji that's a fortified whole grain blend and a sorghum blend. And you, in addition to just given it and it's tasty, you also tell them the benefits that it has to the local economy and also the health benefits that it has to the children. Then that way they are able to receive. But I think when it's just an abstract concept, it's difficult. But if you show it in a meal and the way the meal is presented, then they're able and they understand. Because climate change is something that they are experiencing. Rains are less, there's floods, so they do get it, but it's just what is the solution that is available for me within my context to make a change.
Right, what about in terms of opportunities? You talked about jobs, of course, but what more opportunities does the Climatesmart school feeding program, of course, offer to people?
So there are several opportunities, and I think the greatest one that I see is increased opportunities for farmers. If the government of Kenya was to achieve universal school feeding, that means that we are feeding 10 million kids, which would be great. It means that the latent demand for grains such as maize, sorghum, millet is over 300,000 metric tons.
Right.
That's an opportunity for farmers to engage in that economy, to be suppliers of that food. In addition to that, there's also this opportunity while you're growing these foods that are maybe more drought tolerant resistant, then you can implement climate smart agricultural practices. So you're also regenerating your soils and not just using natural resources to their depletion while we are feeding our children. The second opportunity I see is that government actually did give a presidential directive for 100% transition to clean cooking. And clean cooking could be your biogas, your clean cooking stoves, it could be LPG, it could be e-cooking as well.
Right.
And that transition comes with it a whole new industry for the schools to have this equipment. So those are jobs for our young people. Those are new industries and skills that we are creating, not only for ourselves, because we are the pioneer country that's saying we are going to go the climate smart school meals way, but other countries will follow. And we can be the pioneer and also send out our human capital to help other countries within that transition.
Is it affordable?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It depends on how you want to look at affordability.
Right.
So like earlier mentioned, we're destroying our environment so that we can feed our kids. So it's difficult to put a cost on our environment, which we know we need to protect for future generations. However, in addition to that, early research information shows us that as you transition, these other forms of cooking are cheaper.
Right.
The expensive cost is the initial investment in the infrastructure, so like the cooking technology, but in the long run, the fuel does tend to be cheaper.
Have you tried, are there any innovative partnerships that are in place, especially with the Kenyan government and what you're doing at the moment?
So we have seen several. I think the one greatest partnership that exists, it's not innovative, it's not new, but needs to be encouraged and collaboration needs to be there, is the Ministry of Education is responsible for feeding the children, and they're the ones who drive what a menu should look like. So them partnering with the Ministry of Agriculture, whose responsibility is to work with our farmers, train our farmers, tell them what the demand is. So if they can work together, create that linkage, then our farmers are not producing crops that don't have a market, but the market, they would be producing crops that are available or there's demand from the Ministry of Education. Another opportunity for partnership that we can already start seeing is that we all agree the responsibility to feed our children is on government. However, we can get to the 10 million faster if we all work towards that. So we've seen very innovative partnerships such as Food for Education, Cup of Uji, Mary's Meals, where they work with the parents and other actors in the system so that our kids are getting fed. And then finally, in terms of innovative partnerships, as we transition towards clean cooking, there's a huge carbon credits market that already exists. How can we ensure that there are companies that are working towards ensuring that the local communities, the school that transition, can actually benefit from those carbon credits that they could sell in the market. We haven't seen a successful one yet, but hopefully when I come back in a year, we can talk about that. But hopefully in a year, we'll definitely see something like that.
So we're seeing progress with regard to, of course, this in Kenya. But what about in the continent? Is there any other country that you can cite that has implemented this strategy when it comes to food?
When it comes to food, or when it comes to climate smart school meals?
Strictly climate smart school meals. Yeah.
So you would be proud as a Kenyan to know we are the first country that's making that commitment. And we will be announcing this partnership at the Africa Climate Summit. And the intention is also to be the first country that also announces it at the COP28 that will be coming up. However, in as much as we are the first in terms of climate smart school meals, there are other countries that have gone ahead in terms of achieving universal coverage for school meals. There are countries like Benin that's making huge progress there. But all in all, I think several African countries have made that commitment to reach, are working towards reaching universal school meals.
I mean, if I could ask, there are towns like in Kenya, for instance, in northeastern areas where it's dry and they don't get rainfall, and the climate change has really affected an area like that. What is your program doing to make sure that kids in that area are well fed?
So one of the things that we slowly learn when you talk about school meals is like it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think people who work in the sector will tell you that even sometimes when you send funding to the school for them to source the meals, they have to go to another county. So it makes it even more expensive. So sometimes it's cheaper to actually just send the food. In places where like there's arid areas, what we have seen that works best is in some cases, like in Garissa, there's a model school that has a surrounding 200-acre farm whereby there's commercial production going on to support, but they have access to irrigation and boreholes, but that's not the way you can expand everywhere because schools are meant for learning, really. In such situations, decentralized models whereby we just send the food would probably work best. But we all agree those are the communities that probably need the food the most. And in addition to like the climate impact on their lives has probably been the highest.
Is there criteria, like I'd like to know, is there criteria especially when it comes to like choosing, schools, when it comes to the climate smart school meals? Is there a specific way, that you choose this particular school will be able to benefit, or just how you come up with it?
It's going to be a transition that the government will have to plan. So currently, the first criteria or the first decision that they have to make is, how do we even get to 4.5 million kids? Because you're actually selecting who benefits, who doesn't. So they normally use indices in terms of food security, poverty levels, which sometimes can be challenging because of the way our economy is structured. There's a lot of hidden poverty. So for example, in Nairobi may look very affluent and the numbers may not tell the hidden story of poverty, especially in low-income areas whereby it may not be as visible, and probably children are more food insecure in such a situation vis-a-vis like a farming community. So in that case, when you do that criteria, you try to identify where are the pockets of poverty whereby we can ensure we reach those first, at least with a basic meal, before we get to universal coverage. But back to your question on how do we get to climate smart school meals for all kids? It's going to be a transition because the truth is we cannot produce some of the food that we eat enough currently with our agricultural production. So it will take a while. But just the commitment saying going forward, as we feed more kids, we probably will not include foods that we're importing. We'll be reliant on healthier options such as legumes, cowpeas, green grams, whole grain. Then that way you start making the step towards that.
Right. I'd like to know, from where you sit, what would you like to see the government do, especially the Ministry of Education, when it comes to climate smart school meals?
So I think the first is just the appreciation that they have already, they acknowledge that with expansion of the program, there are conscious decisions that they have to make so that they are protecting the environment. And let me just go back to in the 80s, during His Excellency President Moi's time, he actually made a commitment. It was a presidential directive that was just given, whereby kids in primary school should get school milk. His intention was to ensure kids get a healthy outcome. But what happened? He created a culture of drinking milk. So we have one of the highest per capita consumptions of milk across the region. Some say that's why we're very smart. The second thing that it did is that it created an industry. Because we have one of the best dairy industries, because the milk had to come from somewhere. So smallholders had to produce and increase production. You had to decentralize the factories. You had to ensure that we could process and pasteurize. The other thing that they did is created employment for smallholder farmers to show that this is actually a potential income stream. When he started, his intention was not in any way the economic benefits. And it's the same with the Climatesmart, with the school meal. So we're telling the government, you've made a commitment to feed kids, fantastic. But these are the other benefits that could happen if you are just conscious about it and intentional, so that we're not having unintended consequences on the environment when we were very well intentioned on feeding the children. So on the call of action, I would say, like, one of the things is that we all appreciate that school feeding is probably the largest safety net program that you have. The government is spending on average about 4 billion Kenya shillings a year. You can change how a whole community eats. You can change our dietary patterns so that we're not transitioning to eating unhealthy foods, but we're transitioning to eat more diverse diets, but foods that are also nutrient dense as well. In addition to that, it's also an opportunity to